Hello everyone, Para here from the Paradox Brothers. Today I'm going to be doing a deck profile video for you, and this will be a spirit control deck. I've seen a few deck profiles on YouTube recently, one by the Go Format YouTube channel, so if you haven't seen that one, you should go check it out. This one is a little bit different, but similar idea to that deck. Um, and yeah, so let's get into it. So obviously this will be well, let me preface this by saying just because this has a lot of spirit monsters and that may not be the conventional way of doing goat control, I do think that this is very viable and potentially um, just all around a really good deck. Not just a fun take on it, but it can actually be very competitive. And I'll explain uh, exactly why I believe that as I go through this deck profile. So, starting with the 3 Azura Priest. 1700 attack, 1200 defense, spirit monster. As most of you probably already know, spirit monsters have this unique mechanic where they return to your hand at the end phase of the turn that it's summoned, whether it be your opponent's turn, your turn, whatever. And um, each of the spirit monsters have their own unique ability, most of them being positive, some of them having kind of a negative side effect, but they have, in the case of Susa Soldier, which you'll see in a second, have good stats. So starting with the Azura Priest, a Azura Priest is a great card because it's light. It's a very aggressive card. It can attack all monsters from your opponent's side of the field one time. So it can destroy all their goats, for example. It can destroy all the recruiters. It's just a very good card. Um, it can take a lot of face downs out at the same time if your opponent is building up like a wall. So there's a lot of good utility behind this card. It's a light attribute. Your opponent is probably going to want to out this card if they have goats, so you can almost guarantee it's going to go to the grave at some point. But we play it at 3. We play Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi, it obviously doesn't need much of an introduction. It's one of the more used cards in GOAT format, but very good for resetting your Thousand Eyes of Strix, resetting your Magician of Faith, also taking out warriors, taking someone's monster with Snatch Steal and then flipping it face down. There's a lot of really good uses behind this. Susa Soldier, not so common card, but 2000 attack, 1600 defense. Both those attack and defense stats are actually very respectable. So I commonly will set Susa Soldier in defense mode because, or really any of these, honestly, if I on my first turn, say I draw a Susa Soldier and a Magician of Faith in my starting hand, which is fairly likely, I will set a Susa Soldier turn 1 just to bait out the Nobleman of Crossouts. I mean, the truth is the majority of people will um, use Crossout on the first turn. Sometimes people won't, but my advice to you, if you're really worried about Magician of Faith, unless your opponent has a Pot of Greed or Crystal Charity or Delinquent Duo in the grave already, you could save your knock for the first set and just see what happens. If they don't flip it, more than likely it was either a bait or maybe in a Gravekeeper Spy. Um, but yeah, most people will still use Nobleman across out on the first turn. So it's a safe bet that if you have Magician of Faith in your hand, set this first turn, wait for it to be used, and then set your Magician of Faith next turn. Moving on, uh, I probably should have put this up here actually. The one Chaos monster I play in this deck is just Blackluster Soldier. Uh, Pretty standard for a lot of goat controls. I don't play a Chaos Sorcerer because, although I feel like you probably could if you wanted to, there's enough lights and darks in here, and they're not all flip effect monsters, so they're not going to all get banished if one gets banished with Nobleman of Crossout. So it's definitely possible to play a Chaos Sorcerer if you wanted to. Play Sangan, which can search the Tsukiyomis, the DD Warrior Lady, Sinister Serpent, Magician of Face, a Dark Monster. It can be very good at as a poking, like a poking tool against your opponent because they don't really want to destroy this if they don't have to. They want to banish it, but most of the time they have no choice but to destroy it. Breaker the Magic Warrior, very good. Could be a very good +1 if used correctly. A lot of people I see using this card, they'll summon him immediately, using his counter to blow up a back row. I think holding him in your hand is kind of a better call until you feel like you really care if their back row, what their back row is. Not to mention, as the the, the longer the game is drawn out, the more knowledge you'll gather behind what may be potentially back there. For example, if you find that your opponent's running one Jar of Greed at the very beginning, they're more than likely running multiples. So you have that knowledge. If you see that all the Jar of Greeds are in the grave, well, you know it's probably a real trap. Um, so forth and so on. If you see they don't play Jar of Greeds, you know it's probably not a very chainable trap, or at least not one that maybe they want to have to chain to Breaker. So there's a lot of knowledge that Breaker can give you as well. Um, so yeah, very good card. Let's see, DD Warrior Lady, just a very good out to problematic cards, which you will often need in this type of deck. The reason why Goat Control in general is considered a little bit more difficult to play than a lot of the typical decks is because while you do have outs to lots of cards and lots of ways to beat every deck, your resources are not as plentiful as, say, in Chaos Turbo builds or Warrior builds, where they play a lot of cards that um, either manage themselves, like in Chaos Turbo, they don't really care about the resources. They go to their grave that just fuels their chaos, or in Warrior, where they just play a lot of really strong monsters and kind of just rush you down. So they're not really worried about the resource game either. Goat Control has a lot of resources to manage at any given time. So, but it helps to have Sinister Serpent. So just to discard and to get back. And Tribe Infecting Virus, we can use Sinister Serpent to discard off of, but we could also use any of these spirit monsters that we want to put in the grave to help fuel the Blackluster Soldier. This card can be easily sided out if you're playing against a deck that plays a lot of face down, so you don't really, you're not really going to get a lot of utility out of this, but against Warriors and against Goat Control, this can be quite good, and also against Burn for the Ojama tokens. Kaiko the Ghost Destroyer, just good against anything running Chaos, and also not bad against Warrior, so always a good call to play at least one in a deck that runs any sort of Chaos. Magician of Faith to get back the power spells. There's a lot of spells in here that we want to recur, so 2 Magician of Faith just makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of safe ways to play this as well. Moving on to the spells, Pot of Greed, Crystal Charity, Delinquent Duo, Power Spells, Heavy Storm, Mystical Space Typhoon. For the Goat Control package, 3 Metamorphosis and 2 Scapegoat. Scapegoat works really great in this with the Spirit Monsters. There's a natural synergy that kind of exists there that I wasn't really aware of before, and that is one of the biggest problems with Goat Control is that you might soft lock yourself out of being able to summon monsters, or what they call goat locking yourself. And the mechanic that's built into Spirit Monsters really mitigates that issue altogether, because, say, I set a Susa Soldier at turn 1, I also set a Scapegoat. They force me to activate Scapegoat by trying to Mystical Space Typhoon or Breaker or Heavy Storm. So I chain it. I don't really even have to deduce if I really want to chain it or not. I can just instantly chain it because I know my face down is Susa Soldier. I could just flip them face up and return it into my hand, and my field is no longer locked up. So since you play 9 Spirit Monsters, you aren't going to have that problem as often as you would in a typical Goat Control deck. So that's a natural synergy that exists there that I didn't even think about before. So we play 2 Scapegoats and Creature Swap, which is extremely good in this particular deck. It's always good in Goat Control-like decks because of the Scapegoat. But in this, I'll run you through real quick why it's so good. Obviously, any of the Spirit Monsters, it works quite well, if you're not aware of already. Since this returns to your hand at the end, returns to the owner's hand at the end of the turn, you can Creature Swap for one of their face-down monsters, BLS, whatever they have, and end your turn, and then your monster just comes back to your hand. So this just kind of becomes a permanent snatch deal with no need to, no downsides. But outside of the Spirit Monsters, you have Sangan, which you can attack into your own Sangan after you swap it. Breaker, after its counter has been exhausted. Sinister Serpent. And a flipped up Magician of Faith, even, if you really wanted to. Unless your opponent runs Book of Moons, then I wouldn't recommend doing that. So moving on, Snatch Deal. Really good card, particularly in this deck because of the 3 Tsukiyomi. Smashing Ground. Smashing Ground's in here for kind of problematic monsters. Definitely in here to help you with Gravekeeper Spy. Gravekeeper Spy isn't as big of a problem if we can get our either Smashing Ground back or No Limit Crossouts back with Magician of Faith. So we have some ways of getting rid of Spy. And we also have Tribe Infecting Virus. This card's very good against Spy. So if your opponent is playing Gravekeeper Spy, I would recommend keeping this in for that reason, just because it's very annoying to deal with those otherwise. Two No Limit Crossout, very obvious cards for the traps, Mirror Force, Torrential Tribute, Ring of Destruction, and two Trap Dust Shoot in the main deck. And even though this card can be very bricky at times, it's really only bricky mostly against Warriors. Chaos Turbo, they often have a lot of cards in their hand, so this is usually pretty active even late in the game. But more importantly, in this deck, it allows our creature swap to be a lot more useful because we're not going to creature swap for something like a Sandganner, Sinister, or some other sort of bait. We will know that we're getting a real monster if we know what their hand is. Hand knowledge is always good, but it's particularly good in this deck because the last thing you want to do is use a creature swap and give them something and then take nothing and then just be out of card. You don't want that. And then one Dust Tornado. This is definitely a spot where you can be really anything that you feel like it should be, kind of tailored to your particular taste. But Dust Tornado is a card I like a lot. Against Burn, Warrior, everything. Just a really nice card. It's also good to use its second effect to set a spell or trap from your hand. So you can safely say in their turn, Dust Tornado their back row, and then place this, like Trap Dust Shoot down. That way you know that they have 4 cards in their hand. Your turn begins, you can Trap Dust Shoot them on your turn. Or you can wait until their turn. It might always be best to wait until their turn. It just kind of depends on the state of the game, but the second effect of this can be actually quite good. So that's it for the main deck. To the side deck, I have 2 more Dust Tornadoes. I like this, at least at the moment, I like this against burn cards or burn decks. Roll Decree is obviously really good, but I have another card in here for that. I like to kind of keep some traps in here even though I don't play a lot. So instead if I play against burn, I'll take out probably the Scapegoats and put in the 2 Dust Tornadoes and then just have 3 Dust Tornadoes in the, in the main deck at that point when I'm playing against burn. 2 more Smashing Grounds just against it's good for multiple reasons. If your opponent plays like, I don't know, some kind of not so common cards like King Dragoon, or Dragon, I guess is how you pronounce it, where it can't be targeted, this doesn't target, or if they play any just really strong monsters, or really even against Warriors, and as I said before, against Spy, just a really good card I think is underutilized. Soul Release is great at 1 against Chaos Turbo, and just anything that uses Chaos really, because they build up their graveyard. And to be entirely honest, if it's a deck that isn't like Chaos Turbo and doesn't play 3 Chaos Sorcerer or 2 Chaos Sorcerer, and they only play like 1 or 2 Chaos monsters, you can Soul Release like most of their lights, most of their darks, and really just cripple their deck, and they don't really have a game plan after that point. But against Chaos Turbo, I love to let them fill up their graves. Not that there aren't good Chaos Turbo players, because there are a lot of really good Chaos Turbo players, but a lot of players will just burn through their cards as fast as possible, and toss a lot of cards thinking they can get them back whenever they want, and then just Soul Release not only their lights and the darks, but also their power spells. And just, like I said before, kind of really be a hindrance to them. 3 Sakretsu Armor against Warriors, 1 Book of Moon for the Goats control matchup. Spring of Rebirth. This is an interesting card I saw on the Goat format YouTube channel. They played 3 in their side deck, but I like this at 1. I think it's good enough to just draw into with the 3 Dust Tornado and a card later for burn. But every time a monster returns to your hand, you gain 500 life points. It's debatable whether or not Solemn Wishes would be just as effective or probably more effective, because usually you're only going to be summoning 1 spirit monster per turn. But I do like that it's a spell, and you can activate it, then summon, then get that immediately. Because sometimes that 500 life points really will matter. And I just think it's cool. 2 Karibo for the Stun Gates and Reasoning Gates. And then Death Wombat. So Death Wombat, obviously pretty known card for burn damage, effect damage, but I think with the side deck of having Sakuretsu armors in there, I think this card becomes a lot more useful. Uh, Normally it could just be ran over pretty easily, but with Sakuretsu armor, I feel like it could be protected long enough to really matter and really be a pain to your opponent. And because you're going to be playing 3 Dust Tornado against burn as well, you can kind of force them to activate cards. So they can't wait for an out for this card. They're really just going to lose their back row. And so, yeah, I think this card can be really good. Uh, and I don't think Burn's going to go anywhere. And I also don't think that Panda Burn's going to be like the mainstay forever. Even though I think Panda Burn's probably the best version of the deck, I do see a lot of people playing just kind of more traditional burn, control kind of burn, where they restrict your ability to play any cards, like with Chain Energy and cards like that. Um, so this just kind of mitigates that completely, which is great. So then you can play freely because they really count on restricting your movement so you can't take them out. But this just kind of completely throws their game plan out the window, which is really good for you. So um, yeah, that's it for the deck profile. If you liked it, let us know down below. Subscribe, leave a like, and let us know things you might want to see in the future. This deck by no means is perfect, so please take it and just make your own deck based on this similar idea. As I said before, go check out those other GOAT format deck profile videos on YouTube. The GOAT format channel on YouTube always has really good videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.